When Prince William appeared at Pope Francis's funeral, head bowed, jaw tense, suit sharp, there was only one question echoing across every news cycle and social feed. Where was Princess Catherine? The cameras panned, searching. The press, stunned, refreshed their royal rosters again and again. Nothing. Catherine, the future queen, the ever-present counterpart to William at key global moments, was nowhere to be seen. And in her absence, the speculation spiraled into something the palace hadn't prepared for. For more than a decade, William and Catherine had walked side by side through the highs and lows of royal life. Their appearances had become symbols of strength and unity. When the world was watching during coronations, jubilees, state visits, and even funerals, they faced it all together. So to see the future king standing alone among world leaders, flanked not by his wife but by distant diplomatic faces, felt like a rupture in the royal image. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. The Vatican was flooded with dignitaries. Presidents, monarchs, spiritual leaders, and nobles all took their places in the pews of history. But William's loneliness wasn't just physical. It felt personal. Paparazzi zoomed in on his expression, trying to find cracks. Was he anxious, angry, bereaved, or simply carrying a hidden burden the world hadn't yet been told about? Within minutes, conspiracy theories ignited. Some whispered of marital tensions, others claimed a secret royal rift. A few even went so far as to question Catherine's very health, safety, and intentions. As usual, the palace said little. In fact, they said nothing at all. No statement, no reassurance, no photos from behind the scenes. And that silence became deafening. Social media exploded with hashtags. TikTok psychics analyzed body language. Even seasoned royal correspondents, usually careful to avoid baseless rumors, couldn't help but speculate. This wasn't a minor detail, it was a seismic absence. A symbol, a crack in the glass image of the future monarchs. Yet while the headlines demanded answers, the truth remained hidden. And what the world didn't know, what the public couldn't see, was that this absence wasn't about scandal or separation. It wasn't about betrayal or political posturing. It was about something far more intimate, far more human. Catherine wasn't missing because she had turned her back on duty. She was missing because she was holding on for life, for love, for healing. But this wasn't just about royal appearances or whispered protocol violations. This was about survival, a silent battle waged behind palace doors, a decision made not for headlines but for the sake of health, family, and dignity. And as the world speculated, Catherine stayed hidden for a reason the public wasn't yet ready to understand. Because the absence wasn't a message to the world, it was a message to herself. But as the funeral faded from headlines and the world turned to its next obsession, the truth behind Catherine's quiet disappearance was slowly unraveling, and it would reveal a storm far more personal than anyone imagined, a storm forged not by politics or tradition, but by pain, resilience, and the impossible choices made in the shadows of royal life. Was Catherine's absence a breach of protocol, or a matter of life and death? That's the question that haunted the minds of royal watchers, journalists, and even world leaders as the funeral of Pope Francis unfolded in front of billions. For centuries, royal presence at global events has been steeped in tradition, etiquette, and calculated diplomacy. So when Catherine, beloved by the public and praised for her unwavering commitment, was missing from one of the most significant state events of the decade, many assumed something had gone terribly wrong. But what they didn't realize was that her absence wasn't unprecedented. It was, in fact, completely within royal protocol. History has seen similar moments. In 2005, then Prince Charles attended Pope John Paul II's funeral alone, representing the crown without Camilla. Prince William himself has stood solo before, whether in Kuwait, Singapore, or summit meetings where his presence alone held the royal seal. Catherine's absence at the Vatican was not a breach of duty. It was a choice deeply grounded in tradition. Yet this time, it hit differently. Because this time, the absence wasn't just political, it was painfully personal. The weight of that day wasn't measured by protocol alone. Behind the curtains of Buckingham Palace and beyond the smiling portraits, Catherine was in the midst of a grueling recovery. Just months earlier, she had revealed to the world a quiet but harrowing truth. A cancer diagnosis that shocked the nation. Abdominal surgery had already left her physically weakened, and her doctors had made one thing clear: her health came first. The immune system, battered by chemotherapy, could not afford the stress of international travel or the emotional toll of standing under the world's gaze. A single mistake, an infection, a relapse, a moment of fatigue could undo everything she had fought for since her diagnosis. Every decision from the palace had to walk a tightrope between tradition and compassion, between optics and health. Catherine, who had spent more than a decade embodying grace under pressure, suddenly faced a moment where stepping back was more courageous than showing up. And William, bound by duty yet torn by love, made the journey to the Vatican alone, not because he wanted to, but because they both knew he had to. Her absence wasn't a message of weakness. It was a shield, forged to protect a woman in the fight of her life. Still, the public couldn't help but wonder. The empty space beside William echoed louder than any spoken word. People didn't see protocol, they saw pain. And while tradition had its place, it was Catherine's silence that spoke the loudest. Because in that moment, she wasn't just a royal. She was a patient, a mother, a wife, and above all, a survivor choosing health over headlines. But as the world tried to decode the protocols and obligations, they missed something far more important. Catherine wasn't just following royal rules. She was rewriting them. Quietly, powerfully. And in doing so, she was about to remind the world that even queens in waiting have the right to heal. Because protocol wasn't the only force shaping this story, this was a mother and wife fighting to reclaim her life. Inside the grandeur of palace walls, where perfection is often demanded and weakness rarely shown, Princess Catherine was enduring something no title could shield her from. Her battle wasn't against gossip columns or public pressure, it was against her own body. In early 2024, she underwent major abdominal surgery. At first, the palace kept the details close, issuing only a carefully worded statement. But something deeper was unfolding beneath the surface, something far more terrifying than the public realized. The truth came in March, when Catherine stood before a camera and did something no royal had done quite like this before. She revealed she was undergoing preventive chemotherapy for cancer. Her voice was steady, but the pain beneath her words was undeniable. It wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing vulnerability over image, honesty over illusion. She knew what this confession would ignite: the headlines, the fear, the global reaction. But she also knew it was necessary, not just for her, but for every person watching, who needed to feel less alone in their own silent battles. From that moment on, Catherine vanished from the public stage. For nearly 7 months, from spring to fall, her presence was felt only in absence. No photos, no appearances, no carefully orchestrated engagements. It wasn't royal strategy, it was survival strategy. Behind the curtains, she faced the unglamorous, grueling rhythm of chemotherapy. Fatigue that left her unable to stand. Pain that interrupted even the simplest routines. Uncertainty that weighed heavier than any crown. And yet, she did not break. The palace remained tight-lipped, but those close to her knew this was the hardest chapter of her life. In January 2025, Catherine returned briefly to the public with a quiet, powerful message. Her chemotherapy was complete. The battle wasn't over, but the worst was behind her. Still, she made no grand re-entry. No dramatic comeback tour, because healing doesn't happen on a schedule. And Catherine, who had given so much of herself to the public for over a decade, chose something else this time. She chose nature. She chose stillness. She chose to listen to her body, to sit with her family, to breathe without cameras watching. Her sanctuary wasn't a palace ballroom, it was the untouched quiet of her children's laughter, the comfort of William's presence, and the strength she found in moments that weren't broadcast to the world. Even in recovery, she was redefining what strength looked like for a royal woman, choosing presence over performance, peace over pressure. But while the public scanned every church pew and ceremonial step for a glimpse of her, Catherine wasn't hiding. She was healing. And her gaze wasn't fixed on her royal role or the expectations she had once so flawlessly met. It was fixed on something deeper, something far more precious than duty or tradition, something that would ultimately redefine what it means to be a future queen. While the cameras followed William across Vatican stones and royal corridors, Catherine was nowhere near the flash of the press. She was exactly where her heart told her to be at home, holding on to the moments that truly mattered. As the headlines circled with whispers of her absence, few knew the full truth. Louis had just turned 7. Charlotte was about to turn 10. These weren't just birthdays. They were milestones Catherine refused to miss. Not for anyone, not even the crown. For years, she had balanced tiaras with tantrums, state banquets with bedtime stories. But now, in the aftermath of illness and the fragility that came with it, Catherine saw time differently. Royal appearances could be delayed. International funerals could be declined. But the way her children looked at her when she kissed them goodnight, that couldn't wait. It wouldn't last forever. And she knew it. The playground laughs, the scraped knees, the secrets whispered in twilight hours. These were the real treasures, the ones she had almost lost sight of in the tidal wave of royal responsibility. So she made a choice, one most royals wouldn't dare to make so publicly. She chose presence over protocol. She dropped Louis off at school. She read Charlotte's favorite bedtime book, over and over. She helped George with projects, not because it was her job, but because it was her joy. These weren't just maternal instincts. They were moments of active healing. For them, for her, for a family that had been shaken but not shattered. Even the palace, usually bound to rigid expectations, quietly approved. They knew the truth. Catherine had earned her silence. She had endured private pain with public grace, and now she was choosing the only kind of recovery that mattered, the kind rooted in connection, love, and undivided attention. It wasn't a retreat. It was a return to her core, to her family, to herself. Every day away from the public wasn't a disappearance, it was a declaration. A reminder that even future queens are mothers first. That the soft rhythms of daily life, the school runs, the breakfast conversations, the quiet prayers at bedtime, could be just as powerful as any public duty. These weren't lost moments. They were Catherine's way of reclaiming control in a world that had stripped so much away from her. But the story was never just about one side of the marriage. While Catherine nurtured the warmth of home, William was stepping into an altogether different storm. The world watched him take the global stage alone, and for the first time in years, his solitude became symbolic, because behind every royal smile was the echo of someone missing. Someone who, in choosing family, had left a silent void at his side. In a crowd of global titans, presidents, monarchs, spiritual leaders, there was one figure who drew more attention by standing alone than others did, surrounded by entourages. Prince William, the future King of England, stood with quiet gravity at Pope Francis's funeral, his posture composed but unmistakably heavy. He was not flanked by aides or family, not embraced by the typical warmth of ceremonial unity. He was alone, and the world noticed. It was a role of immense importance. Representing the British monarchy at one of the most significant religious events of the decade carried a symbolic weight few could grasp. But for William, it wasn't just about carrying the crown's presence, it was about carrying its pain. Every glance from foreign dignitaries, every flash of a camera, reminded him of who wasn't there. The absence of Catherine didn't have to be spoken. It echoed in every step he took without her. As he stood several rows back, positioned near the Jordanian royals rather than among the most senior attendees, speculation ignited almost instantly. Was this a deliberate diplomatic insult? Had the United Kingdom's standing been diminished? Was this a quiet message from the Vatican to the House of Windsor? Theories multiplied. Some called it a snub. Others whispered of declining influence. But they all missed the point. The position of William's seat said less about power and more about a deeper truth, the unbearable solitude of leadership. What people didn't see, or perhaps refused to see, was that William wasn't just a prince at that moment. He was a husband, a father, a man bearing the weight of 1,000 expectations, while the one person who always shared that burden with him was fighting a silent war miles away. His demeanor was not cold, but controlled. Behind his royal composure was a storm of emotion carefully folded beneath the fabric of duty. There were no grand gestures, no distractions, no soft hand to grasp in that moment of global ceremony. Just a man, cloaked in formality, silently reminding the world that leadership at the highest level often comes with excruciating isolation. And while the headlines speculated about hierarchy and seating charts, the real story was far more human. It was about a leader navigating grief, fear, and responsibility all at once. Yet, William didn't flinch. He didn't falter. His very presence, though distant from the front row, radiated something stronger than rank resilience. And it was that quiet strength, that visible burden without complaint, that told the world Catherine's absence was not an omission. It was an emotional reality being carried, silently and nobly, by the man left standing in her place. But the true answer to why William stood where he did, and why that moment was so carefully orchestrated, was hidden not in emotion, but in history. Because every inch of Vatican ceremony is shaped by centuries of ritual, and every seat tells a story rooted not in sentiment, but in structure. Was William's seat at Pope Francis's funeral a subtle message to the world, or simply the result of a centuries-old protocol? The speculation was immediate and intense. Some saw it as a diplomatic slight proof that the United Kingdom's influence had diminished. Others whispered about royal politics, imagining quiet power struggles between Buckingham Palace and the Vatican. But the truth, far less scandalous and far more symbolic, lay not in conspiracy, but in tradition. The Vatican, with its unmatched legacy of global diplomacy, adheres to a very specific system when seating world leaders at papal funerals. It doesn't prioritize wealth, popularity, or even royal titles. Instead, it follows the French alphabetical order of sovereign states, a practice rooted in centuries of ceremonial consistency. That means Royaume-Uni, the French term for United Kingdom, is placed far behind countries like Allemagne for Germany or Espagne for Spain. And in that order, even a future king must wait his turn. So William's placement, several rows back and seemingly apart from the spotlight, was not a snub. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. A structure designed not to insult, but to ensure fairness. Even monarchs must yield to the hierarchy of language, and in that hierarchy, alphabetical rank trumps royal blood. Those closest to the papal protocols know that this system is fiercely upheld, precisely to avoid favoritism and, ironically, the very backlash it ended up creating in the media. But there's another truth that protocol alone can't explain. Because even with every tradition followed to the letter, William's presence still felt distant. Not because of his seat, but because of the space beside it. The empty place where Catherine would have been. The one constant in his life, the one who so often anchored these high-pressure moments, was missing. And that absence was far louder than the French alphabet could ever be. The world didn't see just a prince following custom. It saw a man carrying his country's crown without his partner. That image, William seated with solemn restraint, removed from the expected front-row symbolism, was not just a byproduct of diplomatic order. It was a visual metaphor for what was happening behind the scenes. Because Catherine's absence had cast a long shadow, and though no protocol dictated where she should have been, her not being there rewrote the emotional weight of the event entirely. Still, the Vatican structure must be understood to truly appreciate the nuance. No one, not even future kings, gets to override centuries of papal ceremony. But this time, the emotional narrative ran parallel to the diplomatic one. The camera didn't just capture William's seat, it captured a void. And that void had nothing to do with alphabetical listings. Because when a partner is absent, not by protocol, but by pain, distance is no longer measured in pews or placement. It's felt in every unspoken glance, every isolated breath, every burden carried alone. Still, that lonely image of William wasn't just a matter of geography. It was a reflection of a couple surviving something far greater. A silent war against time, illness, and the world's unrelenting eyes. The distance between them wasn't division, it was devotion. For Catherine, stepping back wasn't surrender. It was protection. Protection of her own fragile recovery. Protection of her children's emotional foundation. Protection of the only life she could truly control in a world that constantly demanded more than any human should give. Her absence from William's side wasn't the mark of a fractured marriage. It was the quiet roar of resilience, one that required letting go of appearances to preserve something far more sacred. And William understood that better than anyone. His solo appearance at one of the most symbolic global events wasn't the result of estrangement. It was the clearest extension of her sacrifice. She stayed home to fight. He stood up alone to hold their place. That wasn't abandonment, that was trust. And in a royal system that thrives on tradition, hierarchy, and stoic presentation, this was something much deeper. A royal couple, tested in the shadows, choosing each other behind closed doors rather than in front of cameras. For years, they had played their roles flawlessly, projecting unity, grace, and diplomacy. But when the fairy tale was interrupted by illness, what emerged wasn't weakness. It was truth. A truth far more moving than any perfectly timed photograph or choreographed procession. The public, at first confused by her absence, began to see the full picture as news of Catherine's health spread. What once appeared mysterious now became deeply moving. The speculation stopped. The empathy surged. People no longer saw Catherine as the radiant princess in polished pearls. They saw the woman beneath it all. A mother, a wife, a fighter. And they saw a man, her husband, standing under the weight of royal expectation, while privately carrying the heartbreak of watching the love of his life walk through fire, and never once letting go of her hand, even if the world couldn't see it. Their bond wasn't broken, it had simply gone quiet. And in that silence, it strengthened. They didn't need matching coats, balcony waves, or press releases to prove they were united. They had already proven it in the choices they made when no one was watching. They chose survival over spectacle, healing over headlines, and in doing so, they rewrote what royal love could look like in the 21st century. Because the real strength wasn't in walking side by side before the world, it was in standing apart for a moment, trusting that they'd return to one another. And when they did, they wouldn't just pick up where they left off. They would return stronger, with scars that didn't shame them, but instead told a story the public had never been allowed to see before, a story of enduring love, not rooted in fantasy, but in sacrifice, patience, and truth. And when they returned together, stronger, side by side, the world no longer speculated. It watched in awe. When Catherine and William reappeared together in the spring of 2025, the world paused. But this time, it wasn't about spectacle. It wasn't about royal optics or media strategy. It was something far more intimate. They weren't there for the cameras. They were there for each other. After months of silence, distance, and whispered speculation, the two stood side by side, not as symbols of a monarchy, but as survivors of a private war fought under a very public gaze. Their reunion didn't come with grand speeches or flashing lights. It came with something far more powerful: presence. In April, as they quietly marked their 14th wedding anniversary with a secluded escape to Scotland, there were no formal statements issued, no glossy photo ops, no curated narrative. But those who paid attention saw the shift. Catherine's return to public life wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Every appearance, every wave, every glance was different. It held weight. Her smile, still graceful, now told a different story. It wasn't about performance. It was about survival, about standing back up, about choosing to move forward after a season of unimaginable vulnerability. This wasn't a return to the old dynamic. It was the birth of a new chapter, one shaped, not by perfection, but by endurance. The days of carefully sculpted public image had been replaced by something far more resonant: truth. Together, they had faced the unimaginable. Not just illness, but isolation. Not just pressure, but pain. And they had done it quietly, without the shield of constant validation. That silence, once criticized, now emerged as their greatest strength. What once looked like distance had in fact been sacrifice, and what was once framed as fragility was now seen for what it truly was: the strength it takes to rebuild while the world watches. Their separation, brief as it was, became a testament to their individual resilience and collective devotion, the kind of love that doesn't need to be proven because it has already been lived. And so, when they walked back into the spotlight shoulder to shoulder, hearts battered but unbroken, they didn't just reclaim their roles as prince and princess. They redefined them. They showed the world that royalty isn't about pageantry or perfection. It's about rising from the depths of fear, of fatigue, of uncertainty, and doing it together. Because sometimes, the strongest love isn't loud. It doesn't parade itself or clamor for recognition. It sacrifices in silence. It endures in shadow. And it returns only when it's ready not for applause, but for peace. Catherine and William's story didn't fracture under pressure. It held. It bent. It healed. And in the end, it forged into something unbreakable. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.